All right, before we start, everybody, we have lost a pioneer of our field of enjoyment, I guess. I don't know. Our admiration. Mike, the amazing Randy, has passed away.
What?
Yes,
Not
sir.
the amazing Randy.
Yeah, I mean...
The original Joe Nickel.
Yes. The great
God
skeptic.
Damn. Yeah. Oh, that's... When did that happen?
I literally found out seconds before you called.
Oh, shit.
Yeah. It's a bummer, dude. That guy... I mean, I have hours of enjoyment of watching him make people look like assholes on YouTube, watching that shit with my kids and just laughing, and oh man, that sucks. But I mean, he was pretty old. He had a long life, so it's not a real surprise, but it is sad.
Well, way to go for having a good run and genuinely shitting in people's cereal. Good on you, Randy. We'll miss you. You were the original Joe Nickel. Even if you didn't blame it on barn owls, it was still the same fucking thing.
Oh, all right. So let's do a good old-fashioned what cast salute to the amazing Randy.
Way to go, Randy.
Golf too much. Gotta be a man.
Nah, let it out. Just let it out. It's Halloween, motherfucker.
Halloween, motherfucker. How's it going, everybody? Happy Halloween.
We're feeling in the Halloween spirit, and we usually do a Halloween episode, so this is the Halloween episode. So it's gonna be spooktacular and creepy and spooky and farty.
Farty?
Probably just the last one. Yeah,
I take all those out.
Like, do you though? Do you?
If you have ever heard a fart on this podcast,
chances are it's a creaky chair.
No. It wasn't one of us.
It was a ghost fart.
Or a guest fart.
Have we ever had a guest fart?
I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty positive.
It was Paul Hellyer, wasn't it? In his defense, he's 93 years old. Or he was 93 at the time. And no, Paul Hellyer did not fart on the podcast. At least not audibly.
No. Not audibly at all.
But for this year's Halloween show, rather than do what we've done in years past where we just kind of read scary stories and do things of that nature, we decided we're still going to kind of stick with it to differentiate this from regular shows, because it is Halloween, so we got to tell some spooky stories. So what we're going to do, we want to keep it related to Halloween rather than just generally spooky. So we decided to talk about some classic Halloweeny monsters. And so we're going to have some stories today about zombies and werewolves and Draculas. But we'll be telling a story, and then after the story is told, we will talk about, I guess, a case, for lack of a better term, a case or an event that kind of ties in with the idea around that.
Yeah, so in between Mike's stories and after the discussion, we'll sprinkle in a couple cool cases of possible real vampires in between.
Yeah, because, I didn't want to sit here and read Dracula to you guys, so instead of me reading Dracula, we'll just talk about some vampire cases / stories. And I know we just talked about vampires like 2 episodes ago, and we just talked about werewolves like last episode. Not really, but pretty close. And I don't give a shit. This is Halloween, and these are Halloweeny creatures. So we're going to talk about cases we have not yet talked about. So if you don't like vampires and you don't like werewolves and you hate Halloween, then fuck off. Come back when we talk about aliens. Why don't you have a soul? Who hates Halloween? Benson Grenier was a humble farmer. He lived on the outskirts of a farming community in the Midwest. He lived by himself, but had neighbors a half-mile away down an old country road. He was diligent in tending his crops and watching over his animals, and generally led a decent and happy life. He lived peacefully for years, but one night in late August, something began troubling his homestead. It began when he slaughtered his fattest pig and hung it from the rafter of his barn to bleed out overnight. The next day, upon waking, old Benson noticed a chunk was torn out of his pig. It was too large to be a rat. Thinking this to be an anomaly, Benson butchered the pig and thought no more of it. He carefully packaged the portions of meat, but left a few cuts of bacon for the following morning. That night, as he tried to sleep, he heard a commotion in the next room and got out of bed to investigate. As he went into the next room, he saw a large black cat stooped over the bacon he had left out for breakfast. Upon seeing the feline chewing away at his breakfast without a care in the world, Benson gave a shout. Startled, the cat ran out through an open window with the bacon still in its mouth. In the morning, Benson resolved to catch the thief and devised a way to get rid of the pest once and for all. He removed a tender cut of ham from the previously butchered pig and planned to leave it out after the sun went down. Only this time, Benson would not go to sleep, but would lie in wait for the feline prowler to return. This time, he would have his rifle ready, and he would make sure that no more of his food was taken by the four-legged intruder. That evening, he placed the ham near an open window and waited, just out of sight, with rifle in hand. Shortly after midnight, he heard a scratching at his windowsill, followed by the muffled sound of soft paws padding across the kitchen toward the bait he had left. Silently, Benson emerged from his hiding place and aimed at the large black cat. Just before he pulled the trigger, the animal turned and spotted him. It leapt back toward the window as the rifle exploded in the night. The cat hissed and screamed as it ran and jumped out the open window and into the night. A few minutes later, Benson's neighbor came screaming down the road, exclaiming that his wife had been shot and was missing her foot. Benson turned toward the area he had last seen the cat and was startled to find a very human-looking foot where the cat had once been. Witnesses to the event later commented that when they had seen the neighbor's wife, she was hissing and yowling like a wounded cat. So I know that last story. You're probably like, I thought you guys were going to talk about werewolves, and we are. But the reason I wanted to tell that story, for one, because it's a fucking cool story, and for two, because it's more a story of a magical shapeshifter than a werewolf. And some of the stories, or some of the cases that we've talked about regarding werewolves, it's more of a magical transformation. Someone either gets like a magical wolf belt, or they get a magic potion that turns them into a werewolf. Or they make a deal with the devil, and the devil grants them the ability. But there's always some sort of magical power around it. So that's why I wanted to tell that story, because it's a story of a woman who, through some magical means, was able to turn into a cat. And after she was wounded, the human part, or the cat part, wore off, and the human part was left behind. So I wanted to talk about a classic werewolf story. This was one of the first real life stories that I had heard, along with Peter Stump, which we discussed in a previous episode. So if you haven't heard that episode and you want to hear more about real life werewolf murder people, go back and check that out, because it's a crazy story. But this story, this is from France, and it's a 13-year-old boy named Jean Grenier, and he lived in southern France. He was alleged to have been a murderer and a killer of animals, but he had told a few different stories about his origins. So he's kind of like the Joker in that, like, his origins are different, but they have the same end result. But he first came upon these two young shepherd girls who were returning back from the fields, and they saw this weird-looking boy who was just sitting out on a stump, and he had long red hair, but it was all crazy and thick and matted, and he had kind of a darker complexion. But they noticed that he seemed to be unnaturally skinny, like almost like he was starving. They could see all of his bones, and his eyes seemed feral. They said that his eyes were bright and fierce, and his bottom teeth stuck out of his mouth when his mouth was closed, primarily his canine teeth. And his hands were too large for his body, and they just looked like strong hands. And they said he had fingernails that were black and clawed like the talons of a bird. And he was wearing clothes, but the clothes were all torn to pieces. And and he introduced himself to them as Jean Grenier. And he said that he was a son of a priest, and he wanted the girls to decide between the two of them which one of them was prettier, and that whatever one they figured was prettier, he was going to marry. I don't know why he was feeling so presumptuous, and that he could just be like, "Hey, you there, women, I'm a strange-looking boy, all tattered and crazy-looking, but I demand you tell me which one of you is prettier, because I can't make that decision myself. And whichever one is prettier, I will then marry." Not asking if they want to even marry him. It's just like, "Hey, I'm weird, creepy guy chilling on the road, and one of you are going to marry me." But as they were talking, they had asked him why he looked so strange. So he explained to them, he looks the way that he does because sometimes he puts on a wolf skin. And this wolf skin had been given to him by a man named Peter Labourant. And this guy wore an iron chain around his neck, which he would chew on for some reason. And Jean claimed that this guy lived in a place that was filled with gloom and fire. But he said that Pierre shows up and he wraps this wolf skin around him every Monday, Friday, and Sunday. And then every other day he puts it on him for 1 hour at dusk. And when he gets this wolf skin put on him, he transforms into a wolf. And he told them that he kills dogs and he drinks their blood, but little girls taste better, and their flesh is tender and sweet, and their blood is rich and warm. And he claimed to have eaten many young women, and he said that there were 9 other companions that go on raids with him, and as soon as the sun sets, if they're still there, he's going to attack them and eat one of them. So, upon hearing this, these girls ran away, and they went on to tell their story about this creepy kid who's claiming to eat women. There was another girl who actually knew this Jean Grenier guy. She was also 13, and she lived in a small village nearby, and her name was Marguerite Poyer. And she was also a shepherd's daughter, so she was often in the fields tending to the sheep. And Grenier would come up to her from time to time and would tell her stories about him being a werewolf and how he would hunt down people's dogs and kill them, and how he would eat little girls. And again, he told her he had eaten many girls before and he preferred to eat little girls rather than dogs. And he described two specific incidents to Marguerite. One, he claimed that he had nearly eaten this little girl after he killed her, and he started to eat it, and then another wolf showed up, so he left the rest of the corpse for this other wolf. And the second girl, he bit to death, then licked up all of her blood and ate every bit of her except for her arms and shoulders.
Ugh.
So he had been visiting Marguerite Poirier for, on and off for a while. And Marguerite eventually had a violent encounter. Now, I hesitate to say that it was Jean Grenier, but the story goes that one day Marguerite was in the field tending to the flock, and she ended up getting left by herself, so she was alone tending to the sheep, and out of nowhere, this huge animal attacked her and started ripping her clothes with its fangs. And she used her shepherd's staff to beat it, and it kind of jumped back. But she said it sat up on its hind legs like a begging dog would, and it gave her this look that she said just looked like the embodiment of rage. And she said that it resembled a wolf, but it wasn't quite a wolf. It was shorter and stouter, but it had a tiny stumpy tail, and its head was too small for its body, and it was covered in red fur. So because of the red fur, she assumed that this was the wolf version of Jean Grenier. So she completely abandoned the flock, ran home. She was able to survive after beating this thing with her staff. She reported it to the village, or to the rest of the villagers. And this kind of created an alarm because there actually were several little girls in the area that had gone missing. And when Poirier described what had happened to her and explained the stories that Grenier had been telling her, then this led the villagers to start looking for him. And eventually he was caught and arrested. And once he had been arrested and began questioning him, it was revealed that he was not, in fact, the son of a priest, but he was the son of a poor laborer who was living in the same village as Poirier. 3 months prior to him being arrested, he had left home and he started to do odd jobs around the village for money and would also beg for money and food. He had taken a bunch of different jobs helping shepherds tend to their sheep, but every time he was fired for neglecting his duty. So the question came about these missing girls and the stories that he claimed. So he openly told the court about his experiences as a werewolf, but he changed it from the original story. And he told, according to court records, he explained to them that he was 11 years old when his neighbor had taken him into the woods and introduced him to a man named Monsieur de la Forest. And he said he was a man with black skin who had him sign with his nail, his thumbnail, I believe. And he made him sign a document with his nail and gave Grenier and his neighbor this magical ointment and wolf skin. And from that point on, Grenier was able to run around as a werewolf. And he openly admitted to being the creature that attacked Marguerite Poirier. And he said he did intend to kill her, but she was able to hurt him enough that he would leave her alone. He said he had only killed one dog, and it was a white one, and after he killed it, he drank its blood. And he wounded another one, but he ended up getting chased off by the dog's owner. But he did say he did say that he had killed several children. One being an infant that he dragged from its cradle, and he ate it with another wolf. There was a young girl who was tending to sheep that he tore open with his teeth and nails, and he ate her. And then there was a child by a stone bridge nearby that he had killed and attempted to eat. So throughout the questioning in court, he said that he had gone out hunting for children when he was commanded to do so by the Lord of the Forest, who was his master. Whenever he was told by the Lord of the Forest to go hunting, he would rub his body with the ointment that he gave to him, leave his clothes in the bushes, and put on the wolf skin. He would typically go out during the daytime when the moon was waning, but he would also go out as a wolf at night. And part of this agreement to become a werewolf was that the Lord of the Forest had told him he was unable to bite the thumbnail of his left hand, and he always had to keep it in sight when he was in his wolf form. So, and sure enough, the nail on his left hand was thicker than all his other nails and longer. So he at least that jives with his story.
Yeah, that's weird.
But then Grenier started calling other people in, and he claimed to the court that his own father had also received a wolf skin in the ointment and went out with him as a werewolf one time, and together they killed and ate a girl who was tending geese in the next village over. And apparently his father's wife, his stepmother, had left because she saw Jean Grenier himself puke up the paws of a dog and the fingers of a child.
Oh.
So when he puked that up, she's like, nope, fuck this, I'm out. And then she left. But when he was describing his attacks on some of these children, the descriptions he gave in his testimony matched to details of known attacks and of bodies that had been found and wounds that were left on attack victims. But the only other person that could corroborate the fact that he turned into a wolf was Poirier. No one else had seen him turn into a wolf. And even Marguerite Poirier hadn't seen him turn into a wolf. She was just attacked by this weird wolf creature. And then he later claimed that it was him. So the court ended up bringing Grenier's father in, and Grenier stuck to his story, saying that his father went with him one time and they killed this girl and ate her. But there was no proof, so the father was dismissed by the court and he wasn't tried, and he got in no trouble as a result. But Grenier, at the end of the trial, it was determined that Grenier was basically an idiot who was having hallucinations, and he was not under the influence of the devil or the master of the forest or this weird Pierre guy. He was insane, is what the court was saying. So what they did was they sentenced him to life imprisonment at a monastery where he was going to be receiving religious instruction basically until he died. So basically he was being forced into becoming a monk. That's essentially what they sentenced him to. But while he was at the monastery, he continued to run around on all fours, and he would eat bloody and raw meat.
Ooh.
And for 7 years this went on, and he was visited throughout this time by a noted demonologist at the time, Pierre de Lancourt. And as more time went on, Grenier's mind deteriorated more and more and more. And he continued sticking to his story, though, and he told this demonologist that the Lord of the Forest had visited him twice since he had been in the monastery. But when the Lord of the Forest came, he was able to drive him off with a cross.
He was like all for the religious stuff.
Yeah, so it seemed like once he was brought there, he maybe was taught that that guy was evil, or that it was the devil, and that he could protect himself against. I'm not sure exactly what happened, but he apparently bought into all that. But he ended up dying at the monastery when he was 20 years old.
Ooh, young.
Yeah.
Eating raw meat will do that to you.
Yeah. But I mean, maybe the life of a werewolf just isn't a long life. It takes years off your life every time you werewolf around.
He gets dog years.
Yeah, but at least he didn't suffer the same fate that a lot of other werewolves at the time faced. You know, he wasn't flayed. He wasn't tortured on the wheel. He wasn't burned at the stake or decapitated. Like, I mean, all that shit happened to Peter Straub. You know, they pulled all his skin off. They broke his arms and legs on the wheel. They cut his head off, and then they burned the whole goddamn thing. So that's the sad tale of Jean Grenier. Was he a real werewolf? And if not, what was the thing that attacked poor little Marguerite Poirier? The world may never know.
I wanted to cover a couple vampire cases. And when you talk about vampires, when you try to really link them to reality and real cases of vampirism and stuff like that, you're usually left with deranged killers. Richard Chase, some Looney Tunes that just licked somebody's blood that they killed, they're instantly labeled as a vampire killer. But I wanted to find a couple of cases that had some real cool and interesting ties to the possibility of it being an actual vampire. Now, doing research for these, I see them flying around all over the place, probably because it's Halloween, but forgive me if you've heard this, but none of the shit we talk about is fucking new or uncovered. So this is about the Dillsboro vampires from North Carolina. And this is about a dude and his family. One Dr. Alfort, along with his wife and teenage son, moved to Dillsboro, North Carolina in 1788. And there, the doctor purchased some land along the Tuckasegee River and built a fancy schmancy house. And within a few months, the doctor opened up the front two rooms of this home to practice medicine and establish himself as the doctor to the people of the community of Dillsboro. And everything was going smoothly until one day, two laborers that had gone to go see the doctor for what was reported as symptoms of gout. They saw the doctor, he examined them, he sent them on their way, and they both dropped dead 2 days later. And now, for some reason, this pissed the people of Dillsboro right the fuck off. They skipped like...
I'm pissed off just thinking about it. Fuck those guys.
No, they skipped, oh my God, this happens. They didn't even look at, this happens sometimes. They just landed on, we're going to kill you and your whole fucking family. And it's even noted that the two men who passed away were beloved members of the community, but the community wanted fucking blood. It took the town's pastor addressing the people to calm them down. But later that fall, interestingly enough, the pastor's wife went to go check on their daughter one evening while she was sleeping. And when she entered her room, she claimed to have seen, quote, a dark figure hovering above her daughter. And she screamed when she saw this thing, and this figure disappeared, and the kid was dead. And the only sign of injury was being 2 puncture wounds on her neck. Now, this freaked everybody out, and the town sent parties out for searching and patrolling for 2 nights in a row until one of the groups reported seeing, quote, a large black bat-like creature fly over them. 2 nights after that, a young boy ran down to his grandparents' house in the dead of night, screaming about something was attacking his family. A group of townspeople made their way to the boy's home, only to find the boy's mother, father, and sister all dead with the same puncture wounds to the neck. Now, by 1789, things had returned to normal until February, when screams were heard coming from the local town homes. When the town folks reached this house where the screams were coming from, they saw, quote, a black shape fly from the house down a hill and into the doctor's residence. Inside the home, they found the couple who lived there dead with 2 puncture wounds on their neck. Well, the townspeople's hands started shaking, and they clenched their fists and their arms started shaking, and they looked around the arena wide-eyed and pointed to the doctor's house, and they clotheslined his front door right the fuck open. But the doctor tried his best. But the doctor tried his best to keep everybody from entering and denied them permission, but he was quickly overcome and tied up. Now, when questioned, he remained absolutely silent, so the mob moved to the bedroom to find out where his wife was, but she wasn't there. Somebody in the group noticed that the bed was made. They made their way down to the basement where they came along. Accounts vary. Some say caskets, but the account I read was 3 long body-sized crates, one of them which contained a sleeping Mrs. Alfort. It's reported that as they tried to take her out of there, she hissed, cursed, and spit at everybody, but they eventually tied her up next to her husband and eventually were executed.
Classic vampire maneuver.
Yeah. But they eventually executed them, and their son was never seen again.
How did they execute him?
I don't know. And this is the 1700s, and I'm sure they knew what they were dealing with, so probably fire. A boy can dream. It's
always fire. They think that's the best way to purge him. Remember with the witches, that's why they killed him that way, because they thought that the fire would take their soul up to heaven.
I don't mean to laugh, but geez Louise.
Man, country bumpkins, man. You know, they didn't know at the time. What do they know?
Yeah. But I like the story. When I went to look it up and do some cross research, it's definitely written about. It's a well-known supposed case of vampirism. And I like this because, I mean, just from the reports of this, the 2 puncture wounds, there's nothing else that this could be. This has everything. A giant flying bat, shadowy figures, dead people. How convincing is that story for you?
It's just barn owls using mosquitoes. That's the dark forms above the bed are just massive swarms of mosquitoes. And somewhere lurking outside are barn owls that are trying to pull the blood into them so that they can grow stronger.
Ooh, I like it. Most probable.
Exactly.
Well, that's the story of the Dillsboro's vampires. But I kind of find it interesting that the son was never seen again. He was reportedly 15 years old. And if they couldn't find him, I mean, he obviously wasn't there. And just imagine him coming back and finding out that his parents have been like burned at the stake or something like that. I mean, you'd figure he'd eventually show up or come back. And he was never...
Or in a plot twist, it's revealed that he was the head vampire all along.
That was theorized by the people, and they said that this shadowy figure was seen around their residence for some time after, and they all speculated that was the boy, the Alfort boy that they never found, still lurking in the shadows, trying to eat their babies.
Yeah, he is. He wants to eat everybody's babies because he's a big fucking asshole.
Yep. Vampires are just assholes in general. If he was a vampire or not, still an asshole.
I don't know, though. I feel like werewolves are bigger assholes than vampires. They just seem like such dicks. Like, hey, I'm going to just sit here and fucking eat little girls and babies.
Yeah,
those goddamn werewolf.
Those old-timey ones, like the one you talked about earlier, they're always so brutal, barfing up fingers and stuff like that. It's not like a dogman sighting. It's the weird... Not dog man, not dog-headed men, but these werewolf-type people. They're always very animal-like. It's always convincing.
Always wolfing around, being wolves.
Eating folks.
Being dicks. That's what they do.
Mary Ward was a young woman in her early 20s. Raised among the more well-to-do families in the old villages of New England. Well known among her peers for her defiance and stubbornness, it was a regular occurrence that her friends would dare Mary to do silly or foolish things. Each subsequent dare pushing further and further to the ridiculous or sometimes even dangerous. Her friends would often bet amongst themselves to see if the latest challenge would be accepted by Mary Ward. Without fail, Mary would always rise to the challenge and prove that she was fearless in the face of those absurd games her friends would play. It was the eve before Halloween, and all the young ladies and gentlemen in the area gathered. It was the eve before Halloween, and all the young ladies and gentlemen in the area gathered at the Shire's Grove Tavern to celebrate by eating, drinking, dancing, and of course, telling scary stories. One young man by the name of Caleb Jeffries told a story of the hungry corpse that was said to haunt St. Briar's Cemetery, just a few miles down the road. It was said that the corpse was of a prisoner named Henry Daniels that was so dangerous that he was left to rot in his cell as the guards were too afraid to approach him. As the days went by, Henry would wail and moan, begging to be fed, but still, no guard would dare approach. Finally, after a week, Henry Daniels had starved to death, and his body was buried at St. Briar's. According to the legend, the ghost of Henry Daniels would wait for an unsuspecting victim to cross his grave, at which point his corpse would emerge and pull his unfortunate prey into the ground, where he would then eat their flesh to satiate his eternal hunger. At the conclusion of this tale, the youths were gathered. At the conclusion of this tale, the youths that were gathered laughed nervously, with some visibly shuddering and wondering aloud who would be so dumb to chance this sort of encounter and walk among the graves of a haunted cemetery at night. One by one, the young men and women turned their eyes to Mary Ward. A young man named Lawrence Huckabee smirked and said aloud, "I bet that even Mary Ward would be too afraid to enter the graveyard at night." Instantly, Mary retorted, saying, "I am afraid of nothing, but that is a bit of a long journey, dear Lawrence. Make it worth my while, and I will not only enter the graveyard, but stand over Henry Daniels' grave." Embarrassed for being called out in such a fashion, Lawrence blushed, but offered his fine fur-lined gloves and silver pocket watch if Mary was willing to follow through. Of course, Mary agreed, but there was one further stipulation. To prove that you've really gone to the gravesite, you'll need to plunge this dagger into the earth, just in front of the headstone. I will ride out at first light to inspect the grave and retrieve my dagger. If you have done what I say, I will gladly deliver the gloves and watch to your doorstep. Once again, Mary agreed. The crowd cheered for her, and she rose from her seat and marched out the door. Her friends helped her mount her horse, and she sped off down the road to St. Briar's Cemetery and the grave of Henry Daniels. The road was dark and desolate, but this did not faze Mary. She had long outgrown her fear of the dark. Finally, she saw the cemetery gates looming in the distance, and coaxed her horse forward, eager to get this challenge over with. This was to be an easy bet, and she looked forward to mocking her peers for this foolish task the following day. Mary approached the entrance to the cemetery and tied her horse's reins to the wrought iron fence post and proceeded to enter into the dark cemetery. Despite the late hour and the chill air, she remained unconcerned as she passed by old, cracked gravestones. Finally, she found what she was looking for: a weathered old gravestone without embellishment or design. The stone stated simply who the inhabitant was: Henry Daniels. With a small smile, Mary walked directly to the cracked slab of stone, emblazoned with the hungry specter's name, and triumphantly drove the point of the dagger into the soft ground. She waited a moment, almost tempting the ghost to emerge from its resting place. When nothing happened, she sighed and turned to leave. She got no more than 2 steps from the old grave when she felt something tug on her dress. First, she did not believe it and attempted to run, only to feel the hem of her skirts pulling harder, almost as if something was trying to draw her back to the grave. At this point, she finally knew fear. This was an unfamiliar sensation to Mary, and she tried to pull herself free, only to be held firmly in place. Too afraid to look back, she screamed and made another attempt to escape the clutches of the hungry corpse she now knew for a certainty would claim her life. This was her last-ditch effort to be free, but having failed, her fear consumed her, and she dropped dead on top of the grave of Henry Daniels. The next morning, Lawrence rode out as promised and discovered the cold body of Mary Ward, a look of terror etched on her face, and the dagger he had given her pinning her own dress to the earth.
All right, so again, I know that this isn't an actual story about a zombie, but it's a girl who died of fright because she thought a zombie was grabbing her. So it's close enough to being a zombie. Get off my dick. It's fine. But I'm going to tell you a story about a real-life zombie. And this should be a story that I shouldn't say most horror fans, but a lot of horror fans should be familiar with. If you've seen the movie Serpent and the Rainbow, then you're probably at least somewhat familiar with the story of Clairvius Narcisse. But have you ever seen that movie?
I did when I was a kid. I've been meaning to rewatch it for a long time now. I even want to read the book.
Yeah, I've never read the book. I've seen the movie a couple of times, though.
Bill Pullman.
And it's pretty good. Yeah, Bill Pullman. Always a pleasure.
Yeah.
He's my president, I'll tell you what. But the story that the actual events that the movie and the book were based on center on this Clairvius Narcisse. And he was a man who admitted himself to a hospital in Haiti on April 30th, 1962. When he checked himself in, he was displaying symptoms of a fever and fatigue, and then he began spitting up blood. When he was undergoing the tests, doctors could not explain what was going on with him. There was no real cause for his fever or for the spitting up blood or anything. But the symptoms continued to increase until 3 days later, he died. They pronounced him dead. They held him in the morgue on site for a day, and the next day, he was buried. Fast forward to 1980. A woman named Angelina Narcisse, who was Clairvius's sister, was approached by this man who claimed that he was Clairvius Narcisse. And he convinced her by using his childhood nickname and reminding her of events that occurred that only the family members would know. They like childhood memories, things like that. And so he was able to convince Angelina that he was actually Clairvius Narcisse. And other people in the village started questioning him. He was able to convince them as well. And they asked him what happened because there was a burial. He was dead. So he claimed that he had been fully conscious the entire time, but he could do nothing to move. And so when he was in the morgue, he was conscious. When he was being buried, he was conscious. He just couldn't move. And after he was buried, someone came to his gravesite, dug him up, and forced him to work on a sugar plantation. He died, let me see. He died on May 2nd, and from that point on, he was basically, for all intents and purposes, a zombie. What he claimed happened was that after being dug out of the grave, a bakor, which is also, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly. If somebody knows how it's pronounced and I'm pronouncing it wrong, please just disregard that. And because I know sometimes if you hear someone repeat something over and over and it's wrong and you know what the right thing is, it's just really fucking annoying. I'm not trying to be annoying. I just don't know. So I think it's bakor, but it's basically like a voodoo wizard. And so he said after he was dug up, this voodoo wizard took control of him and gave him, or forced him to work on the plantation, where he continued to work until this voodoo wizard died 2 years later. And after he died, his mind was returned back to him, and he was able to eventually regain his sanity and then go back to his family 16 years later. So he was gone for a total of 18 years. Now, there's more to the story because it's accepted that this person is in fact Clairvius Narcisse, and that this isn't somebody just claiming to be him. This is actually him. So what they think, there's a difference between what actually happened and what the folk belief is, I guess. But his case was actually studied by 2 American doctors as well as some other investigators. And what had been, in trying to unravel the events of this case, it was revealed that it may have been Clairvius's brother who had, I guess for all intents and purposes, put a hit out on him.
Right.
But who hired this voodoo wizard to turn him into a zombie, so that it wasn't actual murder, but it was a way to get rid of Clairvius. And because apparently they were in the middle of a rivalry, quarreling over land and their parents' inheritance. So his brother, to get him out of the way, hired this voodoo wizard who then turned him into a zombie. But when asked about it, Clairvius said that the voodoo wizard had taken his soul out, so he was just like this empty shell. But there's an idea that kind of was formulated about what could have happened. There's an ethnobotanist named Wade Davis who did some research on this particular case, as well as a few other cases involving alleged zombies. And there seems to be this chemical mixture that shows up with tetrodotoxin, which comes from the pufferfish, and also bufotoxin, which comes from venomous toads, or poisonous toads, I should say. But what these things do combine is they mimic the appearance of death, and they cause someone to go into a coma where their heart rate and their breathing slows down so that it's indistinguishable from death. So what happens is the person appears to be dead, but once it wears off, they come back. But there's a thought that the voodoo wizard, once he has his zombies back, in order to keep them in this zombie state, because they're not actually zombies, they're human beings that were basically poisoned, and then when they come back, the voodoo priest gives them this hallucinogen that seems to come from a type of nightshade.
Yeah, it's a mixture of a bunch of neurotoxins and hallucinogens and a bunch of crazy shit.
Yeah, and I think what do they call it? I can't remember there's a name for it, but this is all that these zombies are given to eat. So it keeps them in this zombie state and makes them so that they're controllable.
Ooh, microdosing.
It basically what it does is it turns them into slaves. It just completely mindless slaves that will just do what they're told without questioning. And so while it seems like the voodoo priest, when he died, he lost his power over the zombies, what had really happened was he wasn't keeping up on their daily intake of hallucinogens. So eventually the cloud lifted and they were returned to reality.
That's scary, dude.
So yeah, it's completely scary. And they think that this preparation or this mixture, whatever, the concoction to turn someone into a zombie, either gets spread by it being blown into someone's face so that it enters in through their eyes, nose, and mouth, or that it's rubbed on a type of wound, like they'll scrape somebody or just cause some sort of small wound so that it allows this to get into the bloodstream, and then from there it moves pretty quickly. But while this Wade Davis seems to have or feels like he figured it out, there are some people that think that there is more to it, that this isn't due to some toxic mixture, and that maybe it's more of a psychological thing, where because of the cultural beliefs in the area mixed with some sort of hallucinogen is driving people to assume this zombie state, like some sort of hypnosis mixed with psychedelics or something. But Davis stands by his idea that this is some sort of toxin that it presents itself, or that gets presented to the victim, which causes them to fall under this spell, for lack of a better term. But really, it's just the way that the toxin is reacting to the body, and it creates what would appear to be death.
Yeah, I remember researching this. I think we might have touched on this years ago. I mean, with like the first year of the show. And I remember Davis finding or stating in his research that even the northern people of Haiti are so used to that poison from the pufferfish and the frogs that if somebody is stung by this pufferfish and they get severely poisoned by it, that they can't tell if they're dead or alive, because they know so well that their body can mimic death. So they will bury them in a very shallow grave on the beach, so that if they do come back from this toxin,
so they can claw their way out.
Yep, exactly. So he came with some pretty strong evidence. The northern people of Haiti knew about this reaction from this toxin. So, and who knows what they're cutting that shit with. But that case is very strange. I mean, I've even seen that guy interviewed after the fact. Very strange stuff.
Yeah, it's a really weird case. And how do you explain it? How does that case get explained?
Yeah.
There's no real explanation that you can give for it. It's so abnormal and strange. And the fact that there's other cases like it, and there's I mean, we could do a whole show, and maybe we will sometime, on this voodoo zombie thing, because there's so much that goes on with it, and just the fact that there's these wizards that will do this to people if somebody pays them to do it. You know, they happen to have this plantation, and like, you know what? If you're going to pay me, I will gladly turn this guy into a zombie and make him work on my plantation. That's perfectly fine.
From what I understand, there's a difference between the Bokur and just a witch doctor. You know, the witch doctor's more of a medicine man.
Yeah.
And that's who you'd go to. And
right. And the Bokur is like who you'd go to for this sort of thing, or like curses, like the evil stuff.
Exactly. So they can pose as just a normal medicine man. You go to them for some help, and they're like, yeah, put this powder all over your face before you go to bed, and now you're a zombie.
Yeah.
Smoke this, now you're a zombie.
Scary shit, man. Especially if it's something that's as simple as just having this powder blown in your face, you know?
Right.
That's like how vulnerable are you? You're just walking down the street, you walk into a shop, and as you're walking in, some random dude blows this shit in your face. And he just happens to have a deal with the local mortician so that he gets to first dibs on the bodies, so to speak, once they're clear. And then he goes and he collects, and now you are a zombie who works in his fields cutting down sugarcane.
Yep.
Spooky, man.
I was actually going to point out the story about the girl and the gravestone. I know that you said, when did that come out? Where did you hear about that? Was it
what, the girl in the grave story, or the
Yeah.
That's like a story that's retold time and time again. I think it was in probably in the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark anthology somewhere, but it was also, most recently I read it in a collection of ghost stories and folklore called Short and Shivery, which I bought for my son last year for Christmas. And it was one that I really loved when I was a kid. And so I read through it again as an adult. And that story was in there. But I'm pretty sure it was also in the Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark anthology, and it was probably in any number of other ghost stories anthologies as well. It's just it gets retold in different ways. This particular retelling, I wrote it based on the original, so this is, it's slightly different just because it didn't follow word for word the traditional way, but it's basically the same story.
Yeah, I recognized it as the episode of The Twilight Zone.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah, it's called The Grave.
Yeah, see, oh, nice. Yeah, it's something that gets repeated over and over, and it's funny how oral tradition works. Things get passed down, and then they show up in books, and now they're in TV, and then we're talking about it on a podcast where I wrote my own version of it.
Yeah, it's cool.
Yeah,
the good stuff survives.
Yeah, definitely.
All right, so the other story about real vampires supposedly is the case of the Brothers Carter vampires. And this is a little bit more recent than I'm fucking comfortable with. In 1932, the screams and cries of a young lady were heard as she ran down Royal Street in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And she happened to run right into the arms of a bewildered beat cop. And she told the cop that she had been snatched off the street the day before by two brothers and had just escaped their apartment. She showed them slash wounds that she had on her wrists and said that they had been draining her blood, and that if the officer would check the apartment, he would find 4 other people tied to chairs and walls, drained of their blood as well. So the officer and young lady made their way back to the apartment, where the officer ape smashed his way in and did indeed find 4 people bound.
So he didn't clothesline it this time? He ape smashed it?
Yeah, he just King Kong'd that shit right open.
Yes,
he did.
Perfect.
He did find 4 people tied to chairs with rope, with bandages around each of their wrists. Unfortunately, he also found 2 dead bodies wrapped in blankets in one of the rooms in this apartment. Now, after tending to the still living and a quick on-site investigation, they discovered that the apartment belonged to, in fact, 2 brothers, Wayne and John Carter. They would kidnap people off the street, tie them up in their apartment, cut their wrists, and collect all the blood they could without killing the victim into a cup, drink as much from each victim as they could, dress the wound, and leave at sundown every day. And the cop also noticed that it was getting dark. So figuring these 2 assholes would be coming back home, the officer sat and waited for these brothers to come back for their nightly feeding, which they did, only to be confronted, as they said at the time, a fuck ton of cops. Now, one account states that the brothers...
Is that a direct quote?
Yes, sir.
Yes, a fuck ton of cops.
One account states that the brothers fought apprehension with almost superhuman powers, it taking 7 to 8 officers to restrain each brother. But another account says that they gave themselves up once they saw the law, rather willingly. But either way, they were arrested. And a search of a second property owned by the brothers revealed 14 corpses, all killed by blood loss. The brothers quickly confessed to the kidnapping, the bloodletting, and even the murders, but they also confessed to being vampires. As if they were to remain alive, they would have no other choice but to kill people again to survive. And they grew tired of the curse of being a vampire and just preferred to be put to death. So maybe with, hopefully in a cool note of the story with some proper instruction on how to do so, their wish was granted. They were put to death. There are some things that are related to the story that I blatantly call bullshit on. There is supposedly one of his surviving victims who they suspect to have been sired, because he went on to be arrested and executed for the serial killing of 32 people. Now, in the report...
32 people? Just one dude? 32 people?
Yeah. Now, they have...
Holy fuck.
They have this dude's first name in some of these writings about this case. And that's Ted Bundy numbers. There's nobody at that time that had that was a serial killer with that count. Not documented anyway. I looked up the person. His name wasn't familiar. I mean, you could do a quick search and find out that that's not true. And this story also had some more bullshit sprinkles stating that the family were generations old residents of the area, and they had a tomb in the local graveyard. And after they killed the two brothers, they were thrown in the tomb. And of course, like any other good vampire story, once another family member died and they went to go put the body in the tomb, the brothers were not there, and they were actually seen in shadowy form around their apartment for quite some time afterward.
So, how much of the story is true? You've been able to decipher.
I don't know. I mean, I wish I can go to the fucking library and look up really cool old newspaper articles, but I can't. But both of these cases, when I try my best, and when I'm going to cover something on the show, I got to be able to find it at least 3 other places, and both of the stories were, I mean, they're readily written about, but I don't know. You know, it bums me out because now we're starting to see bullshit sprinkled on top of actual old cases. We always talk about how it's difficult to separate the bullshit from honest reports of paranormal events, but now they're just starting to mix the two, and it's getting even muddier. But I don't know how much either of these are true. I will say that doing the show, I was surprised I hadn't heard of these before.
Yeah, I had never heard of them either.
Yeah, me neither. So again, a little bit suspect, but who knows? I mean, I found it across a multitude of articles talking about these cases, and again, the stuff varied. There's a couple places talked about this supposed surviving victim. Older articles and write-ups on this, they didn't mention that at all. They don't mention the family tomb thing, so that could just be some modern article trying to spice it up to make it sound scary. But I did like the similarities between the two cases about the shadowy figure and with the brothers. I mean, that's pretty strange. That's literally like a farm to them. Some of the survivors supposedly remarked about how they weren't so much as cruel to them when they had to deal with them. They were. It was just matter of fact. They said it was more the treatment of cattle rather than something that they're mad at or trying to harm or even kill.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I would be very interested to find out more about that case and find out how much is actually real and how much is phooey bologna.
Yeah, I mean,
I'm sorry for the harsh language there, guys.
Yeah, take it easy, man. It's a holiday.
It is. You're right. I'm sorry.
Some of the articles I found on this had photographs of the supposed apartment that the brothers had rented and were keeping these people in. So, but shit, as well as I do, that could just be some old black and white photo, and they're just saying that for the story's sake.
That doesn't ever happen. I don't know what you're talking about.
But it's very interesting. I read this one article that really took a good look at how this was possible. Basically, let's pretend that this was real, and they really took a good deep dive into the area. And this was geez, I don't even know if I fucking said that this was in New Orleans, which where a lot of vampire stories come from. But they just talked about like the economy of the area and the attitude of the area, and it was a party typed place, and it would be basically easy pickings for a vampire to be able to feed off any environment like that. And it doesn't play out too creepily. Nobody turned into a bat. Nobody had a cape. It was just these dudes trying their best to keep these people alive just to drink their blood. I mean, not eat them. It was just a really interesting story. And if it's an actual case, that's quite compelling.
To me, that seems even scarier, though. Like the whole like turning into a bat or the mist or whatever. That's all. That's cool and all, but to me it's scarier that you've got like these creatures so desperate for blood that they're just going to keep someone tied up and just bleed them for as long as they can, just so they can keep sustenance and they don't have to work on getting another victim. That's scary as hell, man. It's super scary.
Yeah. The girl who escaped and flagged down the police officer said the only reason she got away is because the dude who tied her up, the brother who tied her up, was lazy about it. But she said that there was people there. The survivor says they're the ones who spilled to the cop. The survivors there were the ones who spilled to the police how they did this, what they did. Just a very, very strange case.
So they were literally using blood for sustenance.
Yes.
Oh my God, that's creepy.
Yeah. But who knows? I mean, I've said before, I'm not too into the whole vampire lore. I mean, it's all interesting and cool. I like talking about it, but I don't have, 3 or 4 vampire books sitting around to look these cases up. I wish I did.
It's funny. It's funny you say that. Because literally, right next to me, on my bookshelf, is the Vampire Encyclopedia.
Oh, shit. Look at it, bro.
All right. Give me a second.
It's going to be in Mike's book, and it's going to be under cases that are total bullshit, and you're an asshole if you talk about it. .com.
All right. Let's see what we got here. This thing is a big motherfucker too, by the way. And it's all in alphabetical order, and it's like 900 pages long.
Damn.
So what's this specific case called?
The Carter Brothers. French Quarter, New Orleans, 1930. Nipple.
Let's go to the index. Is this even the index? There we go. There's only one person named Carter here. Let me see if no. So the Carter brothers are not in here unless it's from a different name.
It's all lies.
But this book's pretty comprehensive, but I think it came out in the late 90s. So, when published. 1999 was this version, and this is the version with Kiefer Sutherland on the cover. I'm going to send you a picture of it. This thing is fucking huge.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's nothing about them in there that I could see. Granted, I only looked for about 12 seconds, but yeah. But anyway, happy Halloween, everybody.
Happy Halloween. Even though you're probably stuck in your house and couldn't do trick-or-treating.
We're having trick-or-treating this year. I'm excited.
Oh, yeah?
The city said that we could do it so long as we wear masks and trick-or-treaters are wearing masks, which they should be anyways. If you want candy, put a goddamn mask on. I'm sick of this. I'm wearing a hat and therefore no, it's not a fucking costume. Put your mask on.
Yeah.
Bullshit. Goddamn lazy kids. It's fucking Halloween.
All right, we will close this out with Mike reading The Raven from Edgar Allan Schmo.
And it's the sleepy time version, so you can let it go and just fall asleep to the soothing tones of my voice.
Put on the echo. Give us a sample.
The soothing towns, smooth. The soothing town. I can't fucking talk. The soothing sounds of my voice.
The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered, weak and weary, over many a quaint and curious volume of forgotten lore, while I nodded, nearly napping, suddenly there came a tapping, as if someone gently rapping at my chamber door. "'Tis some visitor," I muttered, tapping at my chamber door. Only this, and nothing more. Distinctly I remember it was in the bleak December, and each separate dying ember wrought its ghost upon the floor. Eagerly I wished the morrow, vainly I had sought to borrow from my books surcease of sorrow of the lost Lenore. For the rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore, nameless here forevermore. And the silken sad, uncertain rustling of each purple curtain thrilled me, filled me with fantastic terrors never felt before, so that now to still the beating of my heart, I stood repeating, "'Tis some visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. Some late night visitor entreating entrance at my chamber door. This it is, and nothing more." Presently, my soul grew stronger, hesitating then no longer. "Sir," said I, "or Madam, truly your forgiveness I implore. But the fact is I was napping, and so gently you came rapping, and so faintly you came tapping, tapping at my chamber door, that I scarce was sure I heard you. Here I opened wide the door. Darkness there, and nothing more. Deep into that darkness peering, long I stood there wondering, fearing, doubting, dreaming dreams no mortal ever dared to dream before. But the silence was unbroken, and the stillness gave no token, and the only word there spoken was the whispered word, "Lenore." This I whispered, and an echo murmured back the word, "Lenore." Merely this, and nothing more. Back into the chamber turning, all my soul within me burning, soon again I heard a tapping somewhat louder than before. "Surely," said I, "surely that is something at my window lattice. Let me see then what the reed is, and this mystery explore. Let my heart be still a moment, and this mystery explore. 'Tis the wind, and nothing more." Open here I flung the shutter, when with many a flirt and flutter, in there stepped a stately raven of the saintly days of yore. Not the least obeisance made he, not a minute stopped or stayed he, but with mine of lord or lady perched above my chamber door, perched upon a bust of Pallas just above my chamber door, perched and sat, and nothing more. Then this ebony bird beguiling my sad fancy into smiling, by the grave and stern decorum of the countenance it wore. "Though thy crest be shorn and shaven, thou," I said, "art sure no craven, ghastly grim and ancient raven wandering from the nightly shore. Tell me what thy lordly name is on the night's Plutonian shore." Quoth the raven, "Nevermore." Much I marveled this ungainly fowl to hear discourse so plainly, though its answer little meaning, little relevancy bore. For we cannot help agreeing that no living human being ever yet was blessed with seeing bird above his chamber door, bird or beast upon the sculptured bust above this chamber door, with such name as Nevermore. But the raven sitting lonely on the placid bust spoke only that one word, as if his soul in that one word he did outpour. Nothing farther than he uttered, not a feather than he fluttered, till I scarcely more than muttered, "Other friends have flown before. On the morrow he will leave me, as my hopes have flown before." Then the bird said, "Nevermore." Startled at the stillness, broken by reply so aptly spoken, "Doubtless," said I, "what it utters is its only stock and store, caught from some unhappy master, whom unmerciful disaster followed fast and followed faster, till his songs one burden bore, till the dirges of his hope that melancholy burden bore, of never, nevermore." But the raven still beguiling all my fancy into smiling, straight I wheeled a cushioned seat in front of the bird, and bust and door. Then upon the velvet sinking, I betook myself to linking fancy unto fancy, thinking what this ominous bird of yore, what this grim, ungainly, ghastly, gaunt, an ominous bird of yore, meant in croaking, nevermore. This I said engaged in guessing, but no syllable expressing, to the fowl whose fiery eye is now burned into my bosom's core. This and more I sat divining, with my head at ease reclining, with the cushion's velvet lining that the lamplight gloated o'er, but whose velvet violet lining, with the lamplight gloating o'er, she shall press, nevermore. Then, methought, the air grew denser, perfumed from an unseen censer, swung by seraphim, whose footfalls tinkled on the tufted floor. Wretch, I cried, thy God hath lent thee, by these angels he hath sent thee, respite and nepenthe, from thy memories of Lenore. Quaff this kind nepenthe, and forget this lost Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, whether tempter sent, or whether tempest tossed thee here ashore, desolate yet all undaunted, on this desert land enchanted, on this home by horror haunted, tell me truly, I implore, is there balm in Gilead? Tell me, I implore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Prophet, said I, thing of evil, prophet still if bird or devil, by that heaven that bends above us, by that God we both adore, tell the soul with sorrow laden, if within the distant Aidenn it shall be clasp a sainted maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Clasp a rare and radiant maiden, whom the angels name Lenore. Quoth the raven, nevermore. Be that word our sign of parting, bird or fiend, I shrieked upstarting. Get thee back into the tempest, and the night's Plutonian shore. Leave no black plume as a token of that thy soul hath spoken. Leave my loneliness unbroken, quit the bust above my door. Take thy beak from out my heart, and take thy form from off my door. Quoth the raven, nevermore. And the raven never flitting, still is sitting on the pallid bust of Pallas, just above my chamber door. And his eyes have all the seeming of a demon's that is dreaming, and the lamplight o'er him streaming throws his shadow on the floor. And my soul from out that shadow that lies floating on the floor shall be lifted nevermore.